Before I begin, I feel like I should apologize to anyone who doesn't believe in God. But whenever I stumble across words that maybe have been misused, like God, I like to remember that it says all through the scriptures that God is love. So if you ever see a word in a song you don't want to sing, you can always replace it with the word love. Must be love somewhere. And that song actually does have that sense of hope in the midst of despair. It was written during the time of the Civil War, actually. And can you imagine singing that in the time of war in our country, when our country was so divided, when your people have been so disenfranchised that you were treated as slaves and all your rights were taken away from you and you were never treated with respect. And you could still see love somewhere. What kind of resilience does that take? You know, before I was a minister, I was a special education teacher, and I spent more than a decade teaching children with behavioral needs. And every day of my teaching career, I was haunted by this one question. What makes some children bounce back from their circumstances while others do not? I watched children facing nearly the same circumstances, same systemic hurdles: poverty, family substance abuse, trauma, crushing weight of instability and racism. And I saw some navigate the storm with a baffling, beautiful tenacity, while others remained paralyzed in a cycle of hurt that continued and continued and continued. I wished I could bottle whatever it was up and feed it to them, maybe inject them with it, the strength to keep going on. But the harder I looked for the medicine or the program, the more I realized it didn't exist. In my teaching training, I studied the pioneers of resilience, such as Norman Garmansey. In the 1970s, his questions started researchers asking, instead of what made someone sick, what kept other people well? Why do some people stay healthy while under the exact same conditions, other people get sick? Why do some children flourish while others wither? One of the landmark studies on resilience was conducted by a psychologist named Emmy Werner, who followed 698 children born in 1955 on a Hawaiian island of Kauai for over 3 decades. A third of these children were considered high risk, born into poverty with parents who struggled with mental illness or alcoholism, living in chaotic, abusive homes. And Werner expected all of these children to fail. But something remarkable happened. About 1/3 of the high-risk children grew into competent, caring, confident adults. They graduated, held jobs, formed healthy relationships, and contributed to their communities. I'm trying to use an iPad today because people were complaining about me losing my papers, but it's complicated. Researchers were struck by this group because they initially called them invulnerable. These were the kids who thrived against all odds. But as the research evolved, they realized that these children weren't superheroes. And they weren't special. They didn't have special DNA. Their resilience wasn't a rare chemical trait. It was what researcher Ann Matson later called an ordinary miracle. Researchers, and it turns out that this ordinary magic, this ordinary miracle, wasn't inside the child at all. It was in the systems around them. It was in the caring aunt, a stable school, a mentor who saw and supported them. Werner discovered that every resilient, successful child in her study had at least one person who accepted them with unconditional, positive regard. What she called one person who cares. It might have been a grandmother who told stories on the porch, a teacher who noticed when they were hungry, a couch who saw potential beneath, a coach, sorry, who saw potential beneath a rough exterior, or a safe place to sleep like a couch. Or a neighbor who kept their door open all the time. We learned that the greatest threat to any person's well-being, is not the adversity itself, but the destruction of these basic human conditions and connections. A human can survive poverty, but they cannot survive isolation. It turns out a child can weather a parent or a partner's addiction, but they cannot survive a community's indifference. In the book Unpoverty, Rich Lessons for the Working Poor, the author Mark Lutz calls the worst, most difficult kind of poverty the poverty of tenuous connections. Poverty of tenuous connections. I love that phrase. It turns out that what makes an individual resilient and what can end poverty is exactly the same thing. Strong connections that help people get their basic needs met and helps people feel less alone. Resilience isn't a chemical in the blood, it's a connection in the spirit. To help people bounce back, we don't need better individual coping skills. We need a better sense of belonging. In our modern culture, however, we have a bad habit of romanticizing resilience as personal grit. We celebrate the self-made individual who pulls themselves up by their own bootstraps, as if that's even possible. But author Sora Chemily warns that this version of resilience is simply a form of toxic individualism that leads to isolation. As we begin Black History Month today, we can see the importance of community resilience modeled by the giants of the past. Consider W.E.B. Du Bois, who founded the NAACP. He lived in a world that was falling apart because of segregation. He was a titan, the first African American to rise out of the visceral terrors of the Jim Crow laws to earn a Harvard PhD. He witnessed lynching, saw the communities he loved burn to the ground, and watched laws that were written to explicitly exclude his people from citizenship. A world that disregarded his brilliance and his humanity. His resilience was not quiet. It was not passive. It was a fierce intellectual pivot. When one door closed, he built another one. When white institutions refused to publish his scholarship, he founded the Crisis magazine, which became the NAACP's voice and reached over 100,000 readers at its peak. When political avenues seemed blocked, he turned to art and to literature. Our arguing that culture could be a form of resistance. When America rejected his vision of racial equality, he looked to Pan-Africanism with others to build a movement that gave voice to the voiceless and empowered people throughout the globe to follow in his footsteps. True resilience is not a solo climb up a jagged cliff. It's a safety net woven from many hands. This shift from I to we is the most radical move of resilience we can make. It's what I saw in Minneapolis. Ordinary people standing up, standing out. Du Bois practiced what I call a realist faith. He saw the world exactly as it was, racist and unfair. But he refused to accept that reality as final. He famously wrote, "Human advancement is not a mere question of almsgiving, but rather of sympathy and cooperation among classes who would scorn charity. Today is the seed time, now are the hours of work, and tomorrow comes the harvest." For Du Bois, resilience was about waiting, not about waiting for a handout or waiting for the sun to come out. It was about planting seeds while it was still raining. It was about acting in the present with the faith that in the future that he may never see. It turns out that the seed for resilience is hope. Now, not the naive optimism that everything will work out, but the disciplined commitment to the work toward the utopian vision that we all want to see happen, even when it doesn't seem like it's even near. This echoes the wisdom of the Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron, who reminds us that when things fall apart, we are preparing the ground for healing. Drawing from her own experience of divorce, she suggests that when our walls of certainty crumble, we are finally exposed to the ground where we can plant. Breakdown becomes the breakthrough. For Du Bois didn't try to keep it together by conforming to a broken system. He allowed the falling apart of the old world after the Civil War to point the way for preparing the ground for something new. He understood that his grit alone was not enough. It required the spiritual uplift of all people, white and black. If you want to see what systemic resilience looks like in practice, look at Black and Hispanic communities that have modeled communal resilience for centuries. In these spaces, resilience is viewed as a cultural treasure. It is not something you achieve, it is something you pass down from generation to generation, and you pass it on. In Hispanic culture, it is familia. I flunked conversational Spanish, I'm sorry. Familism. The deep-seated belief that the extended family is the primary source of survival. This isn't just about blood relatives. It extends to compadres and comadres and godparents who become co-parents, neighbors who become tias and tios. When a family faces a crisis, a job loss, an illness, a death, the extended network mobilizes. Someone watches the children. Someone else brings the food, and another helps with the bills. The burden is distributed so no one person breaks under the weight. In Black kinship networks, it is the village mentality born out of slavery. During slavery, when families were torn apart and sold, Black communities created fictive kin, play aunties and play cousins, who were as real as blood. After emancipation, when Black codes and Jim Crow laws tried to criminalize Black life, churches became more than places of worship. They became schools and banks, community centers and organizing hubs. The church mother wasn't just the title, she was the woman who fed the hungry children, mediated disputes, and held the community's memory. When the system fails, community steps in. They transform adversity into social capital, using churches as meeting hall, porches as watchtowers. This is the radical idea of Ubuntu that I talked about last week. I am because we are. We aren't resilient because we are unbreakable. We are resilient because we are connected. Last week, Jenny and I attended an online nonviolent disobedience training by the Freedom Trainers, and I'm going to send the link to everyone so you can do this from the comfort of your home. We wanted to attend because we feel these times are precarious. Maybe you feel that too. And we wanted to understand what faithful resistance looks like when institutions fail, when authoritarianism is on the rise. The training was sobering. It didn't really talk about what to do if you were arrested. It didn't really talk about all the ways we have to stay connected if we're doing an action. But it talked about what type of resistance is necessary to overcome an authoritarian regime. It was sobering. And at the end, one of the presenters said something that has stuck with me. When everything falls apart, when everything seems to have been broken, well, that's when we have the opportunity to build something wholly new, to create the utopian visions we've all been dreaming of. Perhaps this is the breaking before the rebuilding that we've needed since the Civil War. This is the bridge between Du Bois' historical struggle and our current movement. The struggle cannot be just about protest. It needs to be about practicing the village. It needs to be about learning how to hold the line together so that no one person is the hero, but every single one of us does what we can. Faith, what Richard Rohr calls the religious word for resilience, is the courage to let things fall apart without giving up on our dreams for the future. It is the trust that the seed time Du Bois spoke of is happening right now, even in the cracks of the broken pavement. Today, we are invited to practice this kind of resilience. Not an abstract theology. This is a daily practice. It means checking in with your neighbor, even when it's inconvenient. And especially when you're tired. It means showing up to the community meeting, the school board session, and the mutual distribution of support. It means sharing your resources, your time, your skills, your spare room, your casserole dish, because you trust that when you need help, somebody's going to show up for you. Imagine a world where your success is not measured by how much you've endured all by yourself, but how much you uplifted other people, how readily you give and receive. Imagine a performance review that asks, how many people did you mentor? How often did you reach out to a friend or a colleague or a neighbor for help? How much did you contribute to the collective flourishing? How much did you follow someone else's idea for the future to a successful end? We don't need medicine. People don't need medicine to rebound. We need to create a climate of resilience where everyone can thrive. And in the spirit of W.E.B. Du Bois, may we be the sowers of the new tomorrow. And above all, may we be the village that ensures that nobody, not ever, has to walk through this storm alone.